This Hangout on Air is live with live football, and we can see we got Dr. Gene Bramall and the very relaxed Matt Waldman. And Matt, we're going to get that Kickstarter going for you to buy the Browns. This is going to happen. So, what do you see as what's on the checklist when you do take over the Browns? And what looks good this morning is we're going to watch them from London.
Stage an armed coup of the city of Baltimore and take the team back.
After what we saw Thursday night.
And we'll leave the current Browns and the current management and everything at the doorstep of Baltimore, actually of Indianapolis. And then we got to go to Indianapolis. It's like a 3-city plan, basically, is if we're going to bring the moving trucks, we might have to like, get some armed people and come in there and, rob the city of Baltimore, rob the city of Indianapolis, and we'll leave the current Browns on the doorstep of the Indianapolis Colts. Yeah.
Okay, Isaiah Crowell with a nice touchdown run, although it was the backup safety for the Rams. Andrew Santejo is out, is suspended this week, missing the tackle at the end there. But who is Isaiah Crowell? Because the Browns won't take a quarterback. They'll trade down and they'll get more picks next year. Who is Isaiah Crowell going to be making runs like this for next year?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, he's probably got a Latavius Murray type of situation in store for him, which is he probably half expects that he'll be a starter based on what he's shown flashes of, and he'll wind up on a team that drafts a rookie, and they use Crowell kind of as that insurance quote / competition / potential starter if the rookie doesn't perform well. So I really think what you're looking at here is that he's wide open for a variety of zone running teams that may not be satisfied with their current depth chart, but are likely to pick somebody and just want Crowell there just in case things don't work out early on.
But based on what we're seeing this morning, we are going to see Teddy Bridgewater. Well, actually, I'll toss that to Gene first, because based on what we're seeing this morning, there's no reason to leave Case Keenum on the field.
No, it's happening. Week 10, after the bye, he's going.
He's going to be ready?
Yeah, I think so. I think all signs are pointing that way. Case Keenum hasn't done much. They tried to get Sam Bradford back in there as soon as they possibly could, and it didn't go well, obviously. So, Keenum has, on the strength of the defense and what has been a pretty good running game, with Stephon Diggs out, been able to maintain what the Vikings had wanted to do. But when Bridgewater's ready, he's going to play, and I think that's going to be Week 10.
Yeah, so in case you're not watching the game, if you don't have NFL Network or I don't know where it's streaming, I'm sure they have it somewhere. The Browns are up 6-0. They had a turnover, a deflected pass by Carl Nassib, picked off by Joe Schobert, new middle linebacker, and then they had an Isaiah Crowell run for a touchdown after that. And Minnesota's got and then they Brownsed it up and missed the extra point and then fumbled a punt, and we got a field goal for Minnesota. But we'll see. Minnesota's going to make this one interesting, at least. A really interesting week. In addition to weather, Gene, we're actually going to start with offensive line with Washington. And what we expect of this offensive line, how many of the starters are we going to see? And of the ones that we do see, how many of them are going to be 100%?
Yeah, it's not good. I think we could probably spend the rest of the half hour talking about the line. I don't know that any of them are going to be 100% offensive line. Generally isn't by this time of the year. But there's Trent Williams is finally going to shut it down for a bit. And, you wonder with what he's dealing with, which is a risk of his kneecap dislocating on every play. Knowing that it needs surgery, how long they're going to allow him to continue to go out there and risk cartilage damage or something else while he continues to try to play. And the word this morning from, I think it was Ian Rappaport, was that the doctors advised him to let things calm down. Well, the pain may calm down, but the looseness in that particular ligament will not, and it's going to continue to be an issue. So no Trent Williams today. Spencer Long was already ruled out, their center, on Friday. Brandon Scherf tried to practice a little bit and wasn't able to, and there's some concern about what the turf is going to be like today with weather. Right. He's very unlikely to play. I think Morgan Moses is going to go, but he's going to be limited a little bit. And a couple of their backups are struggling. They've got a backup guard that only was in limited practice on Friday, recovering from a concussion. concussion. Tynieszki is still dealing with core abdominal issues, and he's going to be out for another couple of weeks. So it's not just that the players they have that are limited, but if any of those guys, if they're active and they struggle to go, if Morgan Moses has any issues, they're down to their fourth and fifth tackle. And we saw what was, how that affected Green Bay's offense, even as good as Aaron Rodgers was. But very difficult for Washington to run the ball. You would think that they're going to try to move the pocket, I would guess, a little bit for Kirk Cousins and use his mobility to be able to get the ball downfield a little bit. But this is a really rough situation for Washington, and it's not likely to get better anytime soon.
So, Matt, we have the injuries on the offensive line, and say what we will about Dallas's defense, but they do have DeMarcus Lawrence. They do have David Irving. They have some guys who can get pressure on the quarterback. And then there's this weather situation. This one could affect an early game in Philly, an early game for the Jets. But also this is a later game. Looking at the radar right now, it does look like most of the weather is to the north of DC, but that could also factor into some of these injury decisions. How material is this? How silly is it silly for us to think that a team can have 3/5 or 2/5 of their starting offensive line, guys like Trent Williams and Brandon Scherf, these are cornerstones, and still function as an offense even against Dallas? Or is it silly to think that Washington won't be able to prepare for this and paper over it, and with all the weapons they have and Kirk Cousins, it is Dallas's defense? Are we fading Washington, or are we sticking with Washington today?
I think you have to fade Washington a little bit because, covering the Falcons for as many years as that I have here for football guys, the Falcons went through a period where, when you watch them, they had a really bad dry spell with their offensive line. And the 2 years that I believe that they were really bad were the years that Matt Ryan was either barely a top 10 quarterback or not one, top 12 quarterback or not one at all. And you could see that even against weaker defenses, that it was very problematic for the offense to get going. And after listening to Gene Thursday night talk about the dislocated kneecap, or the potential for a dislocated kneecap for Trent Williams, and you saw the number of injuries that Scherf went through, it just seems to me that this team is really on its last legs from the standpoint of its foundation, which is its offensive line. And it's not like the skill players have done an unbelievable job in Washington this year. I mean, outside of when
Chris Thompson,
Kelly has played healthy and Thompson has played well, but just like the Cleveland Browns we're watching here, when your best players are your running backs in your passing game, that doesn't really say much about your passing game at this stage. It actually says something really bad. So I would say that you probably would want to fade the passing game in Washington. I think that's where you're going to be weakest. And, Dallas's run game is probably going to be one of those where you still play Chris Thompson because, he's the check down king. He's going to be the guy that also is going to make plays, against that ground game. And the same thing with Kelly when, and using both of them. But, if you have better options than Jamison Crowder, not by name, but by game, by matchup, I would definitely play them. And I think that, it's a risk to play anybody other than probably Vernon Davis because of quick hitting passes that he can get. And those linebackers, I think against coverage, I think are a little weak, and the running backs.
Yeah, I've been moving Kirk Cousins steadily down my rankings as the week has gone on with this information. Gene, we have another injury/weather situation with Jameis Winston. He hurt his shoulder again. Now he's Jameis Winston. He's going to play, but we're also looking at 15-mile-an-hour winds, gusts up to 25. Tampa and Carolina. It makes, with the cold front, I know a lot of people where you're waking up this morning, it's colder and the weather is factoring in. And of course, as we get deeper into the season, injuries factoring in more. What do we know about Jameis Winston?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be too much worry with his shoulder. He was able to come back, and he had season highs in yardage and passing attempts, and the game plan of the offense for Tampa Bay looked very similar last week as it did before his injury. So I don't think there's too much to be concerned about. They exercised some caution. It did not seem that there was a clear aggravation or some indication that he was sore after that big workload the previous week. So I think downfield accuracy is the primary concern. We saw a little bit of that with Winston last week, but not a ton. He didn't really seem to show any fatigue as the game went along. It was his decision-making that was a concern, I think, primarily. The wind is going to play play into that a little bit, though. So depending on how you think Doug Martin is going to work into the game plan today, maybe we see a little bit less out of Winston. We're not going to see him leave the pocket as much, although there was a little bit of that last week too. I'm not too concerned about him. I think he's going to play. I think he's likely to finish the game. I think it's hard, unless they fall behind, to project him for another, mid-40 pass attempt game. But something we'll watch. I think he's going to do okay.
Let's look a little closer at this game, Matt. You've got Carolina, once 4-1, now 4-3. Cam Newton, once in the middle of a renaissance, now in a free fall, at least for being able to move the offense based on last week. We've got, this Carolina offense. It looked like it was coming together, but now Christian McCaffrey still isn't making those big plays. And, this has been a bit of an inconsistent offense the last few weeks. On the Tampa side, Tampa is basically playing for their lives now at 2-4, a season with a lot of promise. This is a bit of a last stand game. I mean, we talked about Jameis Winston. Doug Martin hasn't really got it going. The defense has been riddled. It seems like this could be anywhere from a shootout. It could be an ugly defensive game. It could be an ugly offensive game. It could just be an ugly game, but what could be pretty for fantasy.
I actually think that Carolina is going to win this game handily, and it's going to be a big win. And and people who've been saying Cam Newton, he's still a good fantasy quarterback this year, they're going to get that opportunity to say that for 1 week or another week, and then and then have some rough sledding after that. Because when you look at the quarterbacks that have faced Tampa Bay's defense, I mean, Tyrod Taylor had 268 yards and a touchdown with basically Deontay Thompson. I know we've talked about he's playing good football, but he doesn't have anything to work with other than maybe Deontay Thompson at this stage of the game. Carson Palmer at 283 and 3. And then you're looking at Eli Manning, and Eli Manning, he's just played such great football last year. 288 yards and 2 touchdowns. Case Keenum with 369 and 3. Even Mike Glennon had 301 and a touchdown. Yeah. So, I mean, when I look at and also Brent Grimes is out this week, who is probably their best cover corner. So when you look at it from that scenario, the guy who can play tall and is a small ball cornerback who can play tall against these tall receivers, he's out. So TJ Ward's complaining because he's on a rotation, which he didn't come to Tampa to be in a rotation, as he said last week. So, when I look at this defense, it's not all that great. We talked about them being a paper champion a few weeks ago against the Cardinals, and I think that the paper's about to head to a Carolina shredder this week. I think we're going to see, Carolina put up stats that look really strong. I just don't know if with Winston hurt and the way that Dirk Cutter likes to rotate running backs as much as he rotates safeties, if not more, that this team's going to be able to generate any type of rhythm on offense. So I would be, Mike Evans, you're still going to want to play. You're still going to want to look at Brate or maybe O.J. Howard. But I would say Brate, this Carolina's strength of their defense is coverage linebackers. So I would be a little bit worried about the tight end position. To me, it's going to be, maybe a big play to Jackson, mostly Mike Evans, and a lot of garbage time throwing. So, Doug Martin probably doesn't look all that great of a matchup right now, and you're going to be looking at a big win, I think, for Carolina, I think, whoever you have on their offense as a share, I would, and is able to play this week, I would consider them.
Benjamin and Funchess. And yeah, it's been a tough season for Tampa's defense. Really quickly, Gene, on speaking of Carolina linebackers, Luke Kuechly, good to go this week?
Yeah, he's going to play. Kirk Coleman will be back too. So I have both of those guys. That'll be a big boost to the middle of the defense. Big play wise, run stopping wise. Kirk Coleman's a little bit better in coverage than you give him credit for. At least he's a little bit more of a playmaker. But yeah, Kuechly was practicing toward the end of the last week, fully practiced this week, got cleared from concussion protocol. And hopefully that's the last we hear of Kuechly and concussion in the same sentence this year.
Yes, and Kirk Coleman moving to free safety, so we'll see. He'll get to roam against Jameis Winston and maybe take advantage of some of those questionable decisions. Speaking of questionable, Gene, it seems like we can't get too far from the word questionable and Melvin Gordon in the same sentence. Now it's not this knee issue; it's a foot. And maybe weather isn't going to be as big of a deal in New England as we thought when this storm was first forecast Wednesday or Thursday, but this foot seems like it's a bigger deal than we thought on Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah, I don't think we know what it is. When it was a knee issue earlier in the year, the Chargers are quickly becoming similar to the Falcons and one of the most underreported teams in the league. It's really hard to know what's going on out there at all. We at least got some information that said, well, it's just a little bit of a bruise around the knee, wasn't expected to be a problem. And then with the shoulder as well, last week we were told he was just a little bit banged up. There was no news about this foot at all. Really, the only thing we have to go on is Adam Schefter's note this morning that the foot is, quote unquote, an issue, for whatever that means, but he's expected to play. Austin Eckler has been playing well. Brandon Oliver is back in the offense. Whether that means he's going to be limited today is really hard to say. The Chargers haven't done that. They haven't limited him at all in the past when they've had him on the injury report, limited DNP or otherwise. He did practice 3 times this week. He is expected to play, so I think you have to work under the assumption that they're going to give him his usual workload, but I suppose there's a chance that he's a little bit limited. The Patriots without Dante Hightower, Malcolm Brown is not going to be playing in the middle again today. That's been a soft front 7 against the run when Hightower hasn't been active, so you have to wonder how it's going to play out today. I think you have to roll with Gordon and hope that he gets his usual 20-plus touches. If he does, I think he's likely to be really productive today.
Yeah, this one's an interesting game, Matt, because on one hand, you see the Patriots defense and the Patriots offense will be effective, and you see a potential shootout, a track meet, especially with the weather not playing as big of a role. And this is me being the mayor of Narrative Street or whatever kind of black magic I'm trying to work here. But this game also seems to me like it could be a very conservative game because Bill Belichick is not going to want to leave Tom Brady out there with Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram teeing off on him. And the Chargers' run defense is the weakness of their defense. It just makes sense. Belichick's going to go for the soft underbelly and not the fangs. And on Chicago's side, as Gene was saying, there's weaknesses in the Patriots' run defense. They have seemed more content to center the offense around Melvin Gordon. Maybe we see a little of Austin Eckler in a Danny Woodhead role, and they've gotten in trouble against Kansas City when they've tried to air it out, even though that teams have had success. So this is another very variable game script game, and it's one that has been tough for me to zero in on. What do you see when you look in the crystal ball in this game?
Well, I think when you look at New England, certainly they did some things to address their pass defense over the past couple of weeks, definitely versus Atlanta. But, defense like this, I think, is going to be a little bit more vulnerable to certain crossing routes as long as the team can stay, as long as the Chargers can maintain a level of protection for Phillip Rivers. So I think you're going to see some balanced offense from the Los Angeles Chargers. Maybe we just get the moving truck for them too. But and then Arizona on top of that. They got to go back to St. Louis, I think, or maybe the Rams need to go back to St. Louis. I don't know. It's all mixed up. But when you take a look at this, I think that the big key really here is that the Chargers still can't stop the run. Maybe the defensive line is getting a little bit better because the directive has probably been for them, well, we can't rely on our linebackers to do the job. So you guys are going to have to forsake some of what you do as pass rushers, maybe to help stop up front what's going on in the ground game. But I still think that overall you're looking for somebody to have a pretty big day. And I think you're really going to see 2 guys have a big day. You're going to see James White have a big day as a receiver against these linebackers who can't cover or tackle. And you're going to see the same thing from probably Dion Lewis. And it's also a weird scenario because usually you have to pick 1 to 2 players out of at least the 3 or 4-headed backfield. But then there's even a shot that if they get first and goal frequently in this game, well, if they wear this team out on long drives, you might see Mike Gillislee have a couple of touchdowns in this game without even a lot of carries. Just because if they can run on the Chargers pretty much up and down the field, they'll wear them out and just say, you know what, let's just pound it in here and we'll run gap against these guys, or we'll run our short yardage offense and we'll just finish them off right here. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. But your best bets are probably, your safest bet is White. Your best upside bet is Lewis. And then if you're desperate, you can still look at Gillislee at the goal line.
No, it wouldn't be shocking at all for the Patriots to have 40 running back carries in this game and Gillislee to get 15, 18 of them for 70, 80 yards, a touchdown or 2, because, again, just getting into the mind of Bill Belichick, which isn't the scariest place as it seems, Why try to tangle with this pass rush?
At least you don't have to look at like men's shopping catalogs.
No, not at all. Comfort. It's always about comfort. Slankets. I'm surprised he hasn't worn a slanket or whatever they used to call it. The Snuggie. Thank you. Wow.
We had a dean where I worked who he was a really nice guy, and he was a pretty good dean too. But he looked like the guy on the Snuggie ads, and we used to just laugh that our dean looked exactly like that cheesy guy on late night TV doing this, sitting in the Snuggie with his faux family.
Asleep. Waking up this morning is it looks like Minnesota's offense is not really waking up. I think Minnesota's offense at this point is looking to the refs for flags, basically. This game is still 6-3. I wish there was something to report, but there's not, except that we're going to get to see Teddy Bridgewater in week 10. That's what there is to report from this game. Gene, as we were watching Stephon Diggs this week, it got more and more optimistic as the week went on, and now we're seeing him play. And he may catch 10 passes for 60 yards, but he may catch 10 passes in this game. Golden Tate, a very similar receiver in the sense of working the short and intermediate zone, and maybe not, with the Cleveland's the pass defense. With the Steelers, it's the blitz and maybe slowing that down with some short passes to Golden Tate. It's been getting more optimistic, the Golden Tate outlook. Is he going to play tonight? And if he plays, are you going to trust him in your lineup?
I think he's the least likely of the players that are considered questionable to play, but I think the trend has been strongly positive all week. And the deal with these injuries is it's really hard. Ian Rappaport is still trying to hang on to that, multiple weeks timetable that he gave us initially, but it's really difficult with these AC sprains in those first 48 hours to say, okay, the soreness and stiffness is going to last 2 weeks versus 3 versus 4 weeks. It's really hard to know. It used to be controversial where some of these mid to higher grade injuries you'd be talking about surgery as a possibility to be able to stabilize that joint. But I think the orthopedic folks have gotten away from that. And then, you just watch over the next couple of weeks. And it seems like Golden Tate has been on the side where, the range of motion comes back a little bit sooner. He's been able to take contact a little bit sooner. And he went through practice, not a full practice, but 3 limited practices, was talking to the media all week long about any number of things, some of them not even including football, if you buy into that at all, meaning a certain comfort level with his ability to play. And both Adam Schefter and Rappaport today said that he wanted to play, that he was pushing to play, but that doesn't mean that he will. So it's going to be a little bit of a tough call. If he does go, you'd think that they'd put him out there. And as we've seen with Jordan Reed and other players over time, they just sort of battle through it. They're going to take hits on that shoulder. The way wide receiver position plays, the arms away from the body, they get hit on the shoulders and taken down to the ground on their arm and shoulder a lot. So you would anticipate some periods of time where you'd see some wincing and some struggling and maybe him come off the field from time to time. So I don't think that you can bank on, 7 to 14 targets necessarily as a ceiling expectation for him might be. But I think he's going to play probably in a limited role, and hopefully he's able to do as much as he can with those targets.
So it's a special day for you, Matt. You get to watch the Browns. The rest of the country gets to watch the Browns, and then tonight you get to watch the Steelers, and you got to watch the Ravens.
I get to watch Detroit actually too.
Yeah. So what do we see from this game? What's fascinating to me is I feel like after a rousing start of the season against Arizona, and a game that they won against the Giants, being able to play it really safe and comfortable, I don't feel like the Lions offense has come together. They've furiously tried to come back against a few teams. There was a game against Atlanta, which was a good back and forth game, but I didn't think that their offense has really clicked. They are now get to come out of the bye week. And Jim Bob Cooter said they went through the playbook and they took some plays out. And other than the plays involving Eric Ebron, which this goes into a larger trade deadline story that we'll talk about some different trade deadline things. Try to guess for us what Jim Bob Cooter might be doing, might be taking out of the offense or emphasizing in the place of that, and whether it will work and what we expect to see tonight as Pittsburgh goes into Detroit.
Yeah, I definitely think that they probably removed more of some of the plays to Eric Ebron in this offense for sure. I think that was a good setup there. Maybe they put him in a moving van, but I would say if it not now, February, I think will probably be the time, or at least they'll put the eviction notice up. So when you look at this scenario, I'd say this offense has definitely been a fits and starts type of team. I would think the running game, they probably streamlined some things there. I would imagine that they're probably looking at it from a bottom line's perspective and thinking, well, we might take some things away from what we were doing with Abdullah that weren't working as well. I think that's probably what we would imagine. Otherwise, it's hard for me to really say because, when you look at this team, if it's a disaster, it's because they take away the wrong things that just weren't syncing up because of other scenarios that were kind of supporting it, So, to me, like taking away anything that Marvin Jones is doing would be a mistake if you ask me, because he's their only one that really actually creates plays in the vertical game for them. Galladay's been hurt, but all we know about Galladay is that he whipped Justin Bethel, which is about as difficult for, as, I don't know, taking Eric Ebron out of your offense. So, it's not that big of a deal. I would say that, you have to see whether Galladay can do more than run in a straight line and be physical at the catch point. Those are good things, but it's not enough to be, he's a fantasy stud in the making. So we're going to see if he does a little bit more there. But honestly, I have no idea. I can't wait to look at this game. I look at it and say, well, with Tate being a little bit banged up, I wouldn't feel very good about him, but we know he's kind of a tough guy. He's just always been somewhat of a semi-inconsistent player at certain levels in terms of catching the football. Sometimes he makes great plays, but other times he has issues when it comes to just making contested catches, or he has issues where he has drops and lack of focus in games. So, this is really a deal where I just look at it and say, well, Pittsburgh if there's a weakness with Pittsburgh, it's the fact that they're also an inconsistent team. They're just a slightly better inconsistent team than the Lions are. So this could be a wild game. I have really no idea how this one's going to turn out. I'm just starting Jones and praying.
Sure. Well, and my long shot here, not really a long shot, but again, trying to simulate the coach's thinking here is Theo Riddick. Because when I think of the Steelers, I think of a very aggressive defense, but a defense that can also be baited into being over-aggressive and over-pursuing. I remember, was it last year against Darren Sproles? They let Sproles run wild on dump-offs and screen passes, and it just makes sense. Matthew Stafford. Gene, really quickly, what do we know about Matthew Stafford's condition? He was looking really banged up going into the bye. It's Jim Caldwell, so we're lucky if he even confirms that Stafford's on the team. Do we know anything about Stafford's condition?
That's what we know. We know nothing. I don't think it's going to be a primary issue for him, though. The ankle sprain was mild. The hamstring, quad, whatever it may be, lower extremity strain, probably not a big issue either. I think he's likely to be healthy coming out of the bye. And this is Matthew Stafford. It doesn't make any difference. He's going to be playing, and he's going to find a way to be effective. He played with a finger that wouldn't bend last year, although it wasn't a primary finger for being able to throw the ball. But he'll be out there playing. I wouldn't expect him to be too limited. Hopefully the last couple of weeks, the couple of weeks through the bye will get him out there as healthy as he can be. Wasn't it his rookie year that he played with a separated shoulder and beat the Browns? Yeah, and then played the next week. Yeah, he couldn't lift his arm above his shoulder at the end and then played. It's the same thing that, when we talk about these separated shoulders, that's what Jameis Winston's dealing with. That's what Golden Tate is dealing with. That's what, many of these other guys are. And it's a pain management issue. And it's difficult for a quarterback. And as you said, you saw Stafford come back the following week and he wasn't himself, but he was effective. And I think that's what we're seeing with Winston too. So yeah, Stafford doesn't care. He plays through everything.
I still remember Dante Culpepper standing there with his helmet like, what? I thought I was supposed to be going in, Yeah. Got to be faster on the draw in this league, man. I'm telling you, exactly. In front of you.
It's true. You got to keep playing. Two guys, Gene, in the Buffalo secondary that you can't make the club in the tub, right?
That sounded way too much like Paul Mooney for me. True. We'll pull that out on Sunday morning too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and we never have enough. Any time that we get anybody going to Google or even just going look up their favorite Paul Mooney clips, we can never mention Paul Mooney enough on this show. Let's go to Buffalo. And this secondary has been a very pleasant surprise. This defense has been a very pleasant surprise. But E.J. Gaines, who was kind of an afterthought in that Sammy Watkins trade, has been playing really well, getting his hands on a lot of balls. Probably not today. And then Jordan Poyer, speaking of the Browns, maybe the Browns could use him right now, but the Buffalo maybe can't use him. What are our updates on these players, and how important is that for a secondary that was starting 4 brand new players at the beginning of the year and going against Oakland, whose passing game is red hot right now?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. Well, what they have going for them is Oakland is coming across the country to play an early afternoon game, depending on how much stock you put into that. But David Carr looked better last week. Amari Cooper looked better last week. You wonder if they spent some time, rethinking the offense in the way that they wanted to target their wide receivers. Gaines is out. He's already been declared out. They're calling Poyer a game-time decision, but he didn't practice all week. Doesn't look like he's going to be ready to go. I think they listed him questionable instead of doubtful, but he's clearly to the doubtful side of questionable to me, and I'll be surprised if he's active. They've had enough time to work together a little bit, and teams play so much nickel and dime that even though you're kind of shifting roles around a little bit, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. The problem becomes Jordan Poyer had become a very good safety. EJ Gaines is arguably their best cornerback. So when you take two of your best players out of the starting secondary, and knowing what that means from communication and everything else, I think you have to like Oakland's passing game a whole lot more than you would have this time last week.
Yeah, you have to. And this one, really, Matt, this one has the potential for a shootout in my eyes, because we know that Oakland has a lot of vulnerabilities. LaShawn McCoy's running. This is one where I think we could see Tyrod Taylor, whose play hasn't gotten nearly enough attention this year, play very well. That's why I like Deontay Thompson is that waiver wire to your lineup player. But on the Buffalo side, we saw the cracks in that defense against Tampa, and this one's really fascinating here. And again, Oakland, they punched their way out of the corner last week to stay alive, and Buffalo is not just staying alive. And then they also let Marcel Darius. They traded. It's funny because seeing them trade Darius now seems a bit odd because they're a winning team, but this was all part of the plan at the beginning of the year to move forward. What stands out to you from a fantasy outlook perspective in Buffalo and Oakland?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at Buffalo, I mean, I just think that Derek Carr's in store for a big day. I don't know how he's going to get it done in terms of who specifically is going to be the guy, but you would have to think that Cooper, again, is going to get that opportunity, because if I were the Bills, I'd still be focusing on Michael Crabtree, because he's the more versatile receiver at this stage in terms of being able to make plays anywhere on the field, whereas I think Cooper's getting a little bit of help. He needs a little help right now. And I thought that some of the things that he did were nice, but they were a product of scheming in terms of using him in the slot, using him on quick hitting plays, allowing him to be an athlete after the catch. But from the standpoint of just getting open within the timing of the offense, Cooper's the better guy. So to me, that means, probably their best guy right now is still Tre'Davious White, the rookie, and the rookie's going to get matched up against Crabtree. So I would think Crabtree will have a couple of early good plays, and then White will do what he's done to Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius White, and Julio Jones, which is just shut their behinds down probably after about the midway through the first quarter, and make some pretty good plays here and there. So I think that, you may see, if that's going to happen, then I think Cooper's still probably going to get some opportunities in the middle of the field. You're going to hope that they'll do the same thing against Kansas City. And, you just wonder about this rush defense. If the rush defense, in recent weeks, you look at what they've done, and I would say that no team's really been all that impressive against them. So I wouldn't really look to the Oakland Raiders having success on the ground necessarily. You might have your best shot really is going to be, it's a pick and a prayer really between Richard and Washington at this stage of the game, and maybe even Olawale. If they put him in on occasion, you could totally see this game for fantasy owners in a Murphy's Law sort of way, being where you bet on one of the first two, and Olawale ends up getting in there and having the bigger week than the other two guys. So I'd fade those guys. Look more to the passing game, look more especially to Cooper probably, and then possibly Cook. And I'm not a big Cook fan, but he's done enough that I think that, you could see some opportunities for him to have at least a big play. He's worth a prayer.
Yeah, and Cook is facing a defense, the Buffalo defense that gave up 2 touchdowns to O.J. Howard last week, 6 catches, and Cameron Brate had 6 catches. So it's there. And we do have an update as Adam Thielen finally finds the end zone for the first time this year. And he had his soccer celebration, the real football celebration, ready for this one. And Minnesota takes the lead. We got about 20 minutes here, and covered most of the big injury situations. So let's just talk some football and look forward to some of the other games today, as we do have 6 teams on bye. So we may be digging a little bit deeper. I guess let's start with Indy and Cincinnati, Gene. And of course, it's Cincinnati. I'm gonna ask you because
deeper right away.
Yeah, well, no. Let's just open this up to regular football talk, because on this perspective from this game, Indy looks like a team that's ready to fold up shop. Cincinnati, another team that's trying to, every win now keeps them alive, keeps their pulse going. And it sure seems like this is an Andy Dalton game, maybe a Joe Mixon game, but this is the Cincinnati Bengals. And after a brief renaissance under Marvin Lewis, now we're not really sure what to expect from this team. So do we expect Cincinnati to be that mediocre team that plays well against a bad team, or because they're mediocre, would you not trust them even with 6 teams on bye?
No, I think you have to trust him. Marvin Lewis was his usual grumpy self when folks asked him, why didn't you use Joe Mixon in the second half?
Somebody asked me if he would only give Mixon 7 touches because to punish him. That doesn't sound like Marvin. He's grumpy, but that doesn't sound like Marvin Lewis either.
But it almost seems like the offense is outthinking itself. And I know they have concerns about the offensive line, and maybe you don't want to put Andy Dalton in position to make a mistake in certain situations. But they see it's always a tale of two halves, where they, instead of making adjustments into something that you think would work, they're making adjustments away from. And I've been in locker rooms at halftime, and you just look and you think, okay, why is this going in this direction? And I think it's a legitimate question to ask. And it was probably, I think the reaction was such that, okay, I'm asking myself the same question, and I'm as grumpy with myself as you might be, so I just don't want to talk about it anymore, was kind of the impression I got. So, but there's really no narrative street squeaky wheel stuff in Cincinnati. I think they just plan to do what they're going to do, and they stick with it. You would think that means a whole bunch of A.J. Green and then maybe Joe Mixon, depending on how things go, just based on how this Indianapolis defense has been playing. There's injuries, there's replacement level talent. The offense really hasn't been moving the ball well. On the opposite side of the ball, Cincinnati's cornerbacks, they're getting Adam Jones back. Dre Kirkpatrick is healthy. The safeties are healthy as they've been. And the linebackers have been playing together for a while with Perfect back and Vigil and doing what needs to be done with Kevin Minter out. So, I think rambling here, but I think the offense is going to be better. I would not shy away from the Bengals this week. I think they ought to be favored for a reason.
Yeah, even the Cincinnati defense, we're picking them up. So I want to approach now the subject of the trade deadline, Matt. Michael Lombardi, certainly someone who has lots of ins to the NFL, said this morning that the Colts will trade, on Twitter, anybody except Andrew Luck. And I know there's some people saying, oh, we can't have fun with Andrew Luck. Trade deadline rumors, no. But we can have fun with Vontae Davis, or really anybody. Donte Moncrief is going to be a free agent. That one could be interesting. Maybe they wouldn't trade T.Y. Hilton. Don't trade T.Y. Hilton.
That's what exactly they'll end up doing.
But Chris Ballard. So that's the thing. So we do have a track record of Chris Ballard already. We've seen what he's done already. But what do we think about this report? And feel free to chime in anything you believe in this game that you will see transpire between the Bengals and the Colts.
Yeah, start any wide receiver that you think has a pulse on the Bengals roster. I think that, Tyler Kroft should have a good game. I think John Ross is worthwhile to even consider, since he's supposed to come back healthy.
Yeah.
He's a lottery pickup, and why not give him a shot during the heavy bye week? A.J. Green and LaFell probably have, decent opportunities there. So, I would feel very confident about that in terms of, their passing offense and Andy Dalton doing well this week. I was laughing because when you talked about the whole disciplinary-ish angle, I thought, yeah, Marvin Lewis, NFL head coach, Department of Justice advocate, but I was thinking, yeah, that's exactly how that works, as told to by Roger Goodell, the warden. Oh, no, he's not the warden. Is that Bob McNair? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we saw Shawshank. When we look at this scenario, yeah, I said, I think I tweeted, we saw Shawshank. We saw how that ended. The warden didn't end well for the warden and the the main guard got carried off crying like a baby. So, spoiler alert. When we look at it from this scenario, yeah, I don't know. When you talk about the trade, possible trades going on here, I mean, to me, there's Donte Moncrief. I don't think he has much trade value, but there may be some teams that feel like they could resuscitate him and make him be a primary wide receiver. There may be a couple teams that really love what they saw, or maybe very metrics oriented on certain level of things and think, well, we can mold him into something. Jacoby Brissett obviously would be a great trade value, but who would they have? They'd have the headless offense at this point, which would be Halloween appropriate, but probably not very helpful for them on the stretch. They're not Frank Gore has no trade value, I would think. I mean, at his age. So, to me, the two guys that they wouldn't trade are Luck and Marlon Mack. Vontae Davis makes sense. None of their offensive guys other than T.Y. Hilton to me really have any trade value. So he'd be the guy that I would look to see, going somewhere, and it would have to be to a contender, I would think.
Yeah, it's almost like a fire sale, except the fire already happened. Everything's already burned to a crisp.
He'd be a nice match in Buffalo, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, sure. And I mean, and it seems like Sean McDermott in a team building fashion is going the other way. But
yes, exactly.
But Donte Moncrief's interesting just because he's a free agent, and they may just be looking at. I mean, I'm not sure what his contract would be, so you're always weighing the stuff against compensatory picks. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, you look over the roster for some interesting pieces that teams could acquire, and some of the pieces that are more interesting are ones that Ballard went out and got. Someone like Jabal Sheard could bolster a pass rush, but you go out and get him to help a team that hasn't had a pass rush. You're not going to trade Ryan Kelly, the centerpiece of the line, and the Colts. Go ahead.
If they respond to my plan from the beginning of the show, then Chris Ballard won't have a problem because his team will be in Baltimore. And he can work on whatever we give him back from Cleveland. So, because that's his team anyway.
Contract a team, the Ravens, and then just make Cleveland and Indianapolis combine into one.
They were always complaining about the moving trucks in Ursay. They get their team back. Might not be in the same shape, but hey.
So this is there's a few matchups I'm sure that will go against expectations, but for the most part, this is kind of a boring matchup week. There's not a lot of really interesting matchups, but there is one matchup that stands out in bright, glowing lights as a really fascinating one, as Houston coming off of bye. If we were doing our social issues and football show, we'd be talking about Houston for the whole show, probably. It sounds like, just as an update, not making any comments on this. We're trying to keep this a football show, but 65-70% estimated team will take a knee. DeAndre Hopkins walks out of practice. Apparently the rest of the team had to be convinced to stay in practice. But Gene, I don't want to talk about this. It is a background for this game, but it's Deshaun Watson and this Houston offense, which looks better than any Houston offense we've seen probably in the history of the franchise, facing Seattle. Now Seattle they lost Cliff Averill. It does look like, you can give us some updates on some guys like Earl Thomas and Michael Bennett. Looks like they're going to play. Is this a game where Seattle finds out, hey, there's a new force in the NFL, Deshaun Watson with Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins, and able to make Dwayne Brown is back, who apparently Seattle was talking about trading for, or is this a game where Deshaun Watson finds out, hey, there's a force that's been around for a while in the NFL, the Legion of Boom, and you're going to get a lesson?
And the crowd in Seattle,
he doesn't care about that though. It's Deshaun.
No, that's true, but getting the offensive line in sync at the line. That's right.
Thanks, Matt.
Being able to communicate at the line against Seattle, that's the issue. So he may not care, but they're going to have to figure out ways to make that happen. I think the return of Dwayne Brown is going to be huge. Talking to Matt Betanti, that's been something that, even as well as the Houston offense has played and has protected and brought Deshaun Watson along very quickly after a kind of shaky start to his career there. I think that's going to be huge. Now, they're going to be without Chris Clark at some point when he comes back after the calf injury. Putting both of those guys at the tackle spots is going to make this line even better. Even if it is today a simple 1v1 going from Dwayne Brown from Chris Clark, it's meaningful. But I think the primary concern is how they're going to handle going on the road and facing what hasn't quite been the strength. Seattle's defense hasn't been the strength that it's been in the past. As you mentioned, all those players are going to be healthy. Cliff Avrill's on IR at this point, but Michael Bennett, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor's over the ankle issues that he's had. There's not a lot of concern that the defense isn't healthy, so it's going to be those same 12 to 14 guys out there playing. But I think the road matchup, we're going to find out if Houston plays as well as they've been playing in Seattle, knowing that Seattle's defense isn't as good as it's been, then I think you have to think very highly of them for the rest of the year.
This is a chance for a statement game for Houston, Deshaun Watson, Matt. I got more start-sit questions about Deshaun Watson this week than anybody else. And what was interesting too is the range of options. Some of them were. Now I'm optimistic about Watson, or at the very least, I think his high-end range of outcomes is enough to take a chance on him. So, some of them were Watson or Newton or Watson or Cousins, but some of them were Watson or Big Ben. So there's a little bit of trepidation to play Deshaun Watson this week. How hesitant would you be to play him, and what do you see in this game?
I think there's going to be areas where he's going to be tested, because you have to understand that, where Deshaun Watson shines, as a big play guy, is that he can work outside the pocket and then throw the ball deep downfield, and he's not afraid to do that. The issue is that the way he throws the ball downfield, he puts a lot of air under the ball, and it's usually routes where defenders get behind the defense, the deep zone of the defense. And I just don't see Earl Thomas falling for some of those things. And I don't see Deshaun Watson having a strong enough arm to actually make some of the plays that he got away with in other situations. So I feel like that he's going to be tested there. Their best shot is going to be in the middle of the field, and he's not great in the middle of the field. So, to me, where he's going to need to be able to throw the ball and make plays will be timing routes, which he's not great at outside. So when I look at this scenario, I honestly think that it's from just a matchup perspective, it's still maybe a low scoring game. But I think that Seattle really has the edge here based on what their offense is capable of doing against a defense that isn't completely healthy. And then against, their defense being able to exploit Deshaun Watson in ways that other teams are weren't able to do. I just don't think that Watson is going to be able to get away with as much. He's going to have to be far more disciplined. And unless they can do a lot of things with their play action game from a horizontal, stretching field horizontally, and then being able to do some misdirection to fool the Seahawks defense on some level, I don't think it's going to happen. And then there's the emotional element of this game, and we won't get into the social issues, as you said, but I will say that, the Houston team is angry.
Yeah.
So it depends on, sometimes when you perform angry, it's your best performance. Sometimes you perform angry and you completely fizzle out and lose it. And to be honest with you, if I'm looking at this game, I'm thinking this is a blowout game for the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, I think this could be a type of game where it's like 35-3, 35-10, where Watson maybe has decent numbers, but when you watch the overall context of performance, you're like, wow, he really got exposed on some plays here. So I'm not very I'd be, from a fantasy perspective, I feel okay with the idea of starting him, but if you have a better matchup with any top 15 quarterback, I would consider it. But I would say that it's gonna look bad for them this weekend.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that this could be where the emotion could be more of a lack of focus than something that they draw from, especially with Seattle. And it's going to be fascinating. We've got that one in the Washington-Dallas game in the afternoon games. And Deshaun Kaiser bulldozes in for a touchdown after a little shovel pass under pressure. And, that's where, if you want to say what is there to point to in Deshaun Kaiser's game that says he can last as a starting quarterback in the NFL? Are some of those plays, just like Deshaun Watson, some of the plays whenever you're outside of structure, when the play breaks down, Kaiser made a really nice one to see Isaiah Crowell, Isaiah Crowell is doing something for us in fantasy leagues, just at a time that you probably benched him with Joe Thomas out, but the team not showing they're missing Joe Thomas. Looks like I'm going to bloom them and say that looks like they may go into the half with a lead here. I'm going to go back, Matt, really quickly to the Buffalo-Oakland game, because Marshawn Lynch is suspended. speaking of emotion and helping teams get up off the deck, as we saw Marshawn Lynch provide that a little bit last week. Not playing this week, but Jalen Richard is a player. Surprise, surprise. A Matt Waldman favorite before anybody else was telling us it's Richard, not Richard. You were turning people on to the game of Jalen Richard, but we've got Richard and DeAndre Washington. If you're looking for, with 6 teams on bye, you're looking for a flex, you're looking for a running back too. Is the answer Richard, Washington, both, or neither?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for this particular situation, it's tough with the bye week. You probably want to go with one as your desperation play, and I'd say Richard is still your best bet. He's the better after contact back. He's a little bit smarter between the tackles than what Washington has shown in the NFL thus far. He has Carr's trust as a receiver. He seems to, he seems to be the guy that they use a lot on angle routes and up the seam. So, while they've always been high on Washington, the guy who's actually put it together in games has been Richard. So he's the guy that I would consider. I don't know. I just got a weird feeling that when we look at this, neither one are going to do all that great, and all the while I will end up having like the big play in this game. It just seems that way. But it's the bye week. If you're going to play it the way you need to on paper, Richard is the guy that you're going to want to go with.
We've got just about 6 minutes left here on the Sunday morning hangout, and which we'll see if Minnesota can muster something here at the end of the half. As Cleveland at least is making this an entertaining game and giving us a storyline to watch. I guess let's go down to Chicago and New Orleans, Gene. New Orleans is on the whole not a team we've associated with defense, but over the last 4 weeks now, what they did to Brett Hundley, they have been. And this is a Chicago team that has won in all kinds of strange ways at home or when they were in Baltimore, bolstering Matt's argument to shut down the Ravens. For the most part on the road, we've seen, Chicago not being a very competitive team. Do we see the way these team strengths and matchups line up to be a party, as always, the never-ending party in New Orleans in the Superdome today?
Yeah, you have to like the way Cam Jordan is playing. And I think Mitchell Trubisky has been struggling against any sorts of pressure at all. The Saints defense isn't as weak as it was last year, which I think is obviously a good thing. It's not still as strong. But, we're talking about going down to New Orleans and playing Trubisky I think he's going to be running a lot again today. The Saints are healthy. They're going to get Willie Snead back and working into the offense a little bit. Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara look good. That offensive line has kind of gelled together, even though Zach Strief is still out a little bit. So I think this is, as wrong as I've been often this year, I think this is a game where you expect New Orleans to run away pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. It's in the running backs combination. Sean Payton really has something working well with Ingram and Kamara. And Matt, I love Ted Ginn in this game. I think we're actually seeing now with the return of Tron Armstead, as Gene mentioned, the offensive line getting healthier, the vision that this team had with Ted Ginn and the matchups he could create really starting to come into focus over the last 2 weeks. I love Ted Ginn in this game against Chicago. And I think that, strangely enough, in the late phase of Drew Brees' career in New Orleans, this team is starting to look like the blueprint, where there are going to be more rushing attempts than passes on some weeks. And they have added Marshawn Lattimore. It's been an excellent addition to the secondary. We've, as Gene mentioned, Cam Jordan, maybe the most underrated defensive player in the NFL right now. Is this too easy? Is this potentially a trap game, or it's Chicago? Come on.
Well, I mean, I think there's a potential for a trap game, only that you look at Ginn, he's still kind of a boom bust kind of player in terms of his big play acumen. I mean, they're using him a little bit more in the shorter game to be able to get his run after the catch ability, and they scheme very well with those players. I mean, so I think that there's, you look at this receiving core, and they took a big hit losing Brandon Cooks. I mean, there's no way around that, because Brandon Cooks was kind of a linchpin for how they operate this offense to stretch the field, because Michael Thomas doesn't stretch the field. And so you're seeing kind of the impact of what happens when you don't have an established field stretcher who can hold on to the ball on a consistent basis. And Brandon Coleman isn't that guy. Brandon Coleman is just a guy at best, So The Bears defense is fascinating to me because I thought they've played better this year, and you see a lot of that in terms of how they defend teams against the pass. I mean, there has not been a receiver who's gained 100 yards except for Antonio Brown, and he needed 10 receptions to do it. 10 for 110. That's not really a great stat line for a receiver. Other than that, you've had Mike Evans with 93 yards, and then everyone else hasn't really gotten anything above 75 yards. So the Bears give up, to me, it's more about the ground game. And even then, when you look at the Bears on the ground, no one has rushed for 100 yards against the Bears either. So this is a decent. Go ahead.
If Aaron Jones had been starting and they had focused on him, so there was one team. So I was looking at this too because the Bears defense has been very competitive this year, but against Aaron Rodgers, they were a red carpet. They were a welcome mat, and the Drew Brees is the closest thing they faced to Aaron Rodgers this year. So I agree with you though, but this is the difficulty sometimes in projecting these games. Go ahead.
Yeah, because when it's very true, and then you look at it and say, well, the Bears and the Packers know each other well in divisional teams that see each other twice a year. A little different than Drew Brees, in this scenario. But I'd say that if you're going to bet on anybody, yeah, you bet on the ground game. That's probably your best bet at this point. And you're not gonna bench either of those players. Even if it were the Seattle Seahawks, you weren't going to bench either of those players. So you go with that, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a little bit of a trap game, just because if the Bears can cause one or two mistakes in the passing game, Kamara has held onto the ball extremely well compared to his track record as a fumbler in college. He's done a great job of that. But if Ginn fumbles a ball or they throw an interception or there's enough drops and this game script gets kind of mired down a little bit early on, this could be a little bit of a surprising game. But if I'm betting on it, yeah, the Saints are going to take this pretty easily, and the run game's going to lead the way.
Yeah, and really quickly, are you surprised at how good Alvin Kamara has looked? I mean, really quickly, I almost, when I'm watching him, I feel like I'm seeing what Atlanta wanted from Tevin Coleman. But he is a little more rugged of a runner and has a little. I'm surprised to hear myself say this, but I mean, we are comparing him to Tevin Coleman. That element to the offense he's adding, he's got a little better instincts, a little more acumen running inside than Coleman, but he's giving all that explosiveness for, it looks like every touch could turn into a long play.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably more down on Kamara than other draft analysts, but that was in context of other draft analysts. I still liked him, and he was my number 2 scheme fit type of player, and New Orleans was exactly the type of fit that I'd look for from him. What I've been surprised about with him is his ball security and his pass protection. He's really made the effort to carry the ball high and tight, and he's done a great job of that. He's been pretty good as a pass protector thus far, and he was always good at bouncing off indirect contact. So, like, you get him running through a crease and someone just gives him a shot. If you don't hit, wrap, and drive, he's not going to go on the ground that easily, and it's always been that way. But I've never been high on Tevin Coleman as a player, so this to me has always been easy because Coleman to me just never really fit what people projected him to do. And it's played out in Atlanta, even though you still have some stragglers who are like, he's better than Devonta Freeman and get him the ball more. And they need to find a way. Yeah, they need to find a way to give him the ball more. But Kamara looks like an every down back in potential who could be used that way. Coleman to me looks like a guy that they find ways to use him where they run him on pass down sets and looks, and they throw to him on run down and pass down looks, like what they're doing with Marlon Mack, who also I think has more potential than Coleman in certain respects in a zone defense. Now, in a zone offense. Now, if you put Coleman in a play where they pull guards and allow him to do what McFadden did well, which is head downhill, young man, and just hit the gas, just floor it. He's a floor it back. You just, as soon as he gets the ball, the pedal is at the ground. And that could be a good thing in certain schemes, but the scheme that he's in, that's really not the ideal fit or look for him. So that's why Freeman has gotten the contract, and we'll see what happens this year for him at the end of the season contractually.
Yeah, we're holding it high and tight for you, and we're making hopefully better calls than Steve Sarkisian. And
Gene's at least got the high and tight look.
Yeah,
well, maybe the low and tight.
Oh yes, it's good. We're getting saucier and saucier as the year goes on this year. I don't know what's going to happen on this show by the end of the year, but I know we're going to continue to talk football. I know we're going to continue to enjoy the opportunity we have every week to serve this wonderful community at footballguys.com. And we enjoy taking this journey with you every week, all year, every year, and we'll see what happens here. Maybe Cleveland can give us a nice little shot of adrenaline to start. Even just thinking that Cleveland could get a win in this one, and it doesn't look like we're going to see Cody Kessler in the second half. So that's progress. Hope your fantasy teams are making progress, and we enjoy progressing through the calendar with you always, because you stay classy.